will.
We have a lot of fun. Okay. Oh. So images like the ones I've just shown you make us feel good about college and prison programs, but they don't yet let us understand what the outcomes of these programs are. And that's what I want to turn our attention to now. I'm going to say some things that some of you may disagree with, and I look forward to hearing why. Advocates of prison higher education usually justify such programs on the basis of their rehabilitative power. I have two objections to that. The first is that there are tenuous grounds for valuing them on that basis, and the second is that it sets the bar way too low. Most students, by the time they reach a university program behind bars, have worked on themselves a great deal. Indeed, many enroll in prison education programs precisely because they're committed to turning from their former lifestyles and have no intention of ever looking back. By the time they reach us, they're confident, organized, disciplined, and earnest about their future. That doesn't mean that they don't have a lot to learn in the classroom. In some cases, we have to provide a considerable amount of academic support and enrichment. But truly, most EJP students weren't good candidates for recidivism even before they enrolled in our program, and the research out there certainly doesn't contradict anything that I'm saying right now. It's not that some of our students wouldn't benefit from therapeutic support. Many of them could use what might be called rehabilitation to recover from the destabilizing, traumatic effects of being incarcerated. That's especially true for those who have spent time in solitary confinement or segregation. And I'm showing you now a photograph of the exercise hall at Tams Prison, which is now thankfully closed. The strongest higher education prison programs provide students considerable contact with a mix of people from the outside world. In this way, they support men's and women's efforts to re-socialize themselves. But again, this is very different from turning them from a life of crime. This they did for themselves before they met us. One common version of the argument for higher education in prison as a means of rehabilitation is the assertion that I'm sure many of you have heard. Nod your heads if you've heard this. They're getting out someday. Or, to put in question form, would you rather have an ex-con living next to you who had a college degree or one who hadn't any education at all? Hadn't received any education in prison? I get it. I understand the rhetorical advantages of an argument like that, but I hate that argument, and I don't ever use it, and this is why. The "they're getting out one day" argument essentializes incarcerated people. It suggests that it's appropriate to be afraid of formerly incarcerated people who didn't get education on the inside or who didn't receive training on the inside. And it places the emphasis on us and our needs instead of them and their needs. It foregrounds the security of those on the outside instead of our responsibility. Our responsibility to address the inequities and injustices that contribute to people committing acts of violence in the first place. We know that a disproportionate number of men and women in prison come from poor, marginalized communities like Austin and Chicago. We know that many of them grew up in contexts of want, stress, and crisis. Individuals should bear responsibilities for their actions. And societies should bear responsibility for the consequences of their policies. We know enough about human development and the brain to appreciate that the adverse conditions that we allow so many children to grow up in are likely to lead to their committing violent and self-destructive acts. We know that. Another problem with relying on recidivism or rehabilitation as our rationale, and again, I'm talking about the rationale of higher education programs. I'm not talking about it in terms of ESL, English as a second language, or literacy, or even G&D instruction. I think rehabilitation makes sense in the context there, but not when we're talking about higher education programs. Another problem with relying on rehabilitation as our rationale is that it leaves out those men and women who are going to be spending the rest of their lives in prison, and those who are on death row. Should they be excluded from opportunities to pursue higher education on the basis that they don't pose a threat to public safety anyway? If it's all about our safety on the outside, and lowering recidivism numbers, then perhaps they should be excluded. And indeed, some programs do exclude them. I think that's wrong. And I suspect that many of you think it's wrong too, and that it sits very uncomfortably in your gut the way it does with mine. Many EJP students have tackled these sorts of questions. The question of what is the value of higher education in prison? Why should such programs exist? How can they be justified? And what I want to do now is share with you two longer clips. These are clips from speeches of EJP students addressing these issues. They're both videos that were made at convocation speeches. We have convocations regularly at the prison to celebrate the accomplishments of our students, and the students themselves select which other students will be invited to give the speeches. This is where I had the technical difficulty before, so cross your fingers that you are going to be able to hear. No, this is where I have to take you to Vimeo. And that you hear Mike Braun's convocation speech in January 2000. Can you see that? No, you can't. Let me see.
My name is Michael Braun. I've been a student with EJP since the summer of 2009. And what I kind of want to talk to you about this morning is the transformative nature of this program. During the past couple of weeks, I've been working on a paper for Professor Pinker, who taught a class on the Holocaust a few semesters back. And part of what I was writing about was how higher education in prison programs, and in particular EJP, impact the lives of the men who participate in them. When I was volunteered to speak here today, I knew immediately that what I had been writing about in that paper was what I wanted to talk to you about this morning. Higher education within the confines of a prison encourages both students and instructors to move beyond the structural constraints and create an atmosphere of openness that in and of itself is transformative, for it becomes a catalyst in removing some of the inherent divisions we find in prison. These divisions, predicated along racial, religious, organizational, and stereotypical lines, can become impediments to us communicating openly with each other. Here at Danville, EJP is that catalyst. When I look around this room, I see people in it that have worked not for this program, may never have had the opportunity to speak with each other on a meaningful level, or perhaps even wanted to. This program provides us a platform of social closeness that allows us as students to focus on what brings us together, as opposed to what separates us. Part of what brings us together is a common goal of becoming educated men, a goal that not only helps to combat those inherent divisions we face on a daily basis, but also begins to debunk many of the stereotypes held by society of the incarcerated. I remember my first U of I course, Rob Scott's History of U.S. Education, and on that first day of class we did the EJP trademark of forming the desk into a semicircle and going around the room and introducing ourselves. And I sat there thinking to myself, what the hell is this about? And how is this going to help me? Looking back on it now, that small activity, that small disarming activity, has done more to foster communication between us than I think we realize. And that is what this program is really about. Yes, it's about the courses and building a base of knowledge in areas of study. And yes, it's about writing papers and getting grades and hopefully earning a degree. But it's also about breaking down barriers, biases, and prejudices. It's about communicating with people of different faiths, cultures, and ethnicities. Think about this. Later today, we are going to see our fellow students perform Shakespeare. We are sitting in a room with our instructors, many of whom have earned doctorates in their particular fields of study, and others who are about to earn that highest of degrees. We have had Nobel Prize winners, Pulitzer Prize winners, and academic leaders come here to speak with us. We hosted a symposium on higher education in prison, where people from all around the country came here to see this program in action. This is not your typical picture of life in prison. This is not MSNBC's Raw. I thought, if someone asked me to describe this program as being a piece of art, how would I do that? At first I thought about a Monet, but that didn't work.